I'm Eric Goode, and I'm a lifetime lover of reptiles. And Monsters of God is a five-part documentary series on HBO. And it took me over 12 years to make the documentary off and on. I did a little documentary series called Tiger King that got in the way, and then another one called Chimp Crazy. And now we have Monsters of God about the cold-blooded reptile world, the smuggling and the laws and the animal cops. And it's a cat and mouse story that everyone should watch.
Yeah, it's actually amazing. I'm loving every minute of it. A little bit about me is I think somebody saw Reptile in the press release and was like, "Oh, that's Joey." I have a series here called Everyday Wild where I kind of go out and document local animals. But if I had the space and the resources, I would have giant tortoises and iguanas and chameleons. I grew up with all those things, catching them and releasing them and stuff like that. Monsters of God, Tiger King, Chimp Crazy. There's a theme to your work. What is it about animal people or just humans in general? Because I think we all love animals at some level.
Well, you happen to be in a state called Florida where there's a lot of animal people, and there's a lot of animals running around in Florida that really don't belong in Florida, like your Burmese python problem and green
Yes.
iguanas falling out of the trees. But animal people, listen, it takes one to know one. I'm an animal person, and we tend to be obsessive. We tend to be eccentric, sometimes overly obsessive. And so I've just found it really interesting to find interesting animal people. You think of films like Best in Show, dog people can be
Yes.
very much like their own dogs. They can turn into their own dogs almost. They start to look like their own dogs. So animal people are just an interesting subculture in this country, and there's a lot of them. And so I just found it interesting to do stories about eccentric animal people and animals, and hopefully teach people something by doing it, something
Cool.
positive.
So in the very first episode of Monsters of God, you say that you're a part of the story. Tell me a little bit about your background with reptiles.
I mean, I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, and my parents gave me a pet tortoise when I was 6 years old. And from that point on, I was just in love with reptiles. And I started, keeping reptiles as a kid. And my mother would always tell me, Eric, don't play God. They should be in the wild. But I disobeyed her and kept reptiles nevertheless. And up and through high school, I had a menagerie of reptiles in my bedroom. So I knew many of these people that I chronicle in Monsters of God, the people selling reptiles back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I bought reptiles from some of these people. I kept reptiles. And then I had a turning point in my life where I realized that reptiles, in many cases, are very endangered, especially turtles and tortoises. And I reached a point where I could give back and try to look at the extinction crisis that's happening today with many groups of animals, especially reptiles. Um, and so, yeah, my life has been filled with reptiles from the age of 6 onward, which is over half a century.
Do you still have any reptiles?
I have something called the Turtle Conservancy, an organization that
Yes.
protects turtles and tortoises, and we breed and have assurance colonies of many very endangered turtles and tortoises, some that are extinct in the wild. And so, yes, I still live around reptiles.
Tell me a little bit about the Turtle Conservancy because that comes up. Was there one moment that made you switch to conservation?
There was a moment really in the late 1990s when I became aware of something called the Asian turtle crisis, where so many turtles and tortoises were being taken out of Southeast Asia and other countries, India, Myanmar, Thailand, for both consumption, for the food trade, and for medicine, and then more recently for the pet trade. And it was not sustainable what was happening during the Asian turtle crisis, which continues to this day. Um, and when that happened, I began to realize that turtles and tortoises, along with primates, are the two most endangered groups of vertebrates on the planet. If you measure them by how many there are and how many of them are on the brink of extinction. So half of turtles and tortoises are looking at extinction, as are primates. And so when that happened in the early 2000s, late 1990s, I created the Turtle Conservancy. And we started working with critically endangered turtles and tortoises around the world, primarily buying land and protecting habitat for these animals in countries like South Africa, Mexico, the Philippines, and also Madagascar in particular. And today we work on trying to save critically endangered turtles and tortoises, many of which are extinct in the wild. And as you'll see in Monsters of God, the ending has a very hopeful moment when we breed a species that's never been bred successfully before in the United States. And we will return those back to the wild in a faraway country that you'll learn about when you watch episode 5.
I think one of the things that surprised me was how little their sentences were. A lot of them came out of jail and just went right back into it, and they weren't really that affected.
Well, in the early days of the Endangered Species Act and the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species CITES, these two very powerful laws were created in the early 1970s. They didn't really have meaningful teeth probably until a decade later. And even when you were arrested for wildlife crimes back in the 70s and 80s, the penalties were very low, like a slap on the wrist. Rarely did someone do prison time like they would do for drug infractions. Today, they take these laws more seriously when people are smuggling animals into the United States or out of the U.S. Typically people do see prison time, sometimes fairly significant stretches in prison. So thankfully, the laws have more teeth today than they did 30, 40 years ago.
Florida obviously has tons of invasive species. You don't touch on it in Monsters of God, but you really don't have to when you see the sheer scale of imports that's coming in, legal and illegal. It's really not surprising how that happened, right? So, what is
Well,
it besides the weather about
yeah, I was
Florida?
just going to say Florida is the perfect storm, the perfect environment to have many invasive species, as you do. And in the case of reptiles, Florida has not only Burmese pythons running amok in the Everglades, you have green iguanas from Central America and Mexico. You have Nile monitors, which is a lizard that can get almost to 8 feet in length that can go and eat your puppy or your domestic cat that's running around your house. You've got tegus, you've got African rock agamas, you've got chameleons, you've got Cuban anoles. You have many different species of reptiles and amphibians that are in Florida that should not be there. And so Florida, yeah, it was the perfect storm of a warm tropical climate combined with a huge amount of animal dealers, more in Florida than any other state in the country. And this goes back to the 60s and 50s in Florida. There used to be a place called, I think it was called Wild Jungle, or I forget what it was called actually. But anyway, there was a very famous a place called the Serpentarium in the 60s and 70s with a guy named Bill Haas, who only died a few years ago, who, did snake shows. There were alligator shows in Florida. So yes, the climate had a lot to do with it. And the fact that a lot of wildlife was coming in through Miami and other airports in Florida. And so it made for the perfect storm. Yeah, Florida has more invasive reptiles than many states have native reptiles in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Florida in the 50s and 60s had all these funny kind of roadside attractions all over Florida. There was Ross Allen's, I don't know, Alligator Park, and there was the Serpentarium that Bill Haas ran, and there were all these, there was a place called Snakeatorium. There were many of these places, alligator wrestling, snake shows, and Florida was filled with these kinds of things. And as the years went by, then you started having animal dealers, and because they people needed animals for their acts, and there was a place called Wild Cargo, then Pet Farm, then there was a place called, the Shed that sold reptiles, and there was a place called Glades Herps. Anyway, there were many, many reptile and animal dealers in Florida going back over half a century. So it was kind of the epicenter of all of this. There were other parts of the country that had animal dealers as well, but Florida definitely was a hot spot for the animal shows, animal dealers. The climate had a lot to do with it. It's a sunny place with shady people, as they say. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, don't get me started. I love Florida, and I love the tropical climate, and I'm jealous of Florida oftentimes because it would be easier to live in Florida and keep the animals I keep than it is in California where I am, where it can get very cold at night and then hot during the day. Florida just has that beautiful tropical weather. You have the very rare freezes in the winter, but South Florida is a great place to keep a lot of animals.
Yeah. What's interesting about those invasives is like even in Orlando, we have the agamas now. Like everybody's just moving up and they're adapting just fine,
Well, at least you
which
don't have
is,
too many anacondas yet.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about documentary filmmaking because this was a 12-year process. And as I'm watching it, I'm imagining thousands of hours of footage and hundreds of interviews. What is that process like to keep a storyline focused through all of that post production?
Yeah, good question. So, for the making of Monsters of God, partially because it spanned so many years, and partially just because it was a complex story to tell, so that, it was a difficult story to tell for the lay person, the average person. People that are reptile people may have known some of it already, but most people, you have to keep it fairly high, don't go too far into a reptile rabbit hole. But we interviewed probably over 200 people for the making of Monsters of God, of in which probably I would guess at least half of them didn't make it into the show. So we had to interview, many, many people. And I think we had over 1,500 hours of footage, interview footage to go through and pick apart to make what ultimately is less than a 5 hour show. Um, so yeah, you take 1,500 hours and boil it down to 5 hours of actual, you know, footage that you use in the show. So it's a lot of work, took a lot of time. A lot of smart, talented people worked on Monsters of God. I, did my part, but I would, have to recognize all the other people that made Monsters of God possible. It's a massive collaboration of editors, some writers, people that looked into the archives. Tremendous amount of effort went into the making of a 5 hour documentary.
In those interviews, you talk to Mario, who's you get warned about talking to some of the people you talk to. So at any point, were you nervous? Was there an extra insurance policy you had to take out? No.
No, of course I was nervous. I mean, you know, initially with Mario Tabraue, I spoke to his lobbyist in DC, and the lobbyist said to me, I can think of 50 reasons why you shouldn't talk to Mario. There's no upside for you to talk to Mario. And so, ultimately I was like, okay, there's 50 reasons why you don't want me to talk to Mario, and not a single reason why you want me to talk to Mario. So of course, the only thing I could do is just go to Mario's place because I
Mhm.
struck out. And Mario was kind enough to, talk to me, and then, we spoke for a number of days until we really started filming. And, what you learn about people is that people have a past. People, all of us have some kind of skeletons in our closet. Mario clearly did some things that he really, really regrets. He did time for those things. He did 12 years in prison. But I found Mario to be, once I got my foot in the door and I was talking with Mario, you know, kind of a very principled, thoughtful person. There were times when Mario over the years decided he didn't like me again, and then I was nervous going back to Mario. And so, Mario was funny that way. But yeah, I was nervous initially going and meeting Mario. Um, like I was with some other people in this story, and not only people that you would think about that would be the obvious people to be nervous about. I was nervous sometimes going into situations where I was meeting law enforcement that were very paranoid. So it wasn't
Mhm.
just people like Mario.
Yeah, I think of that one law enforcement officer. He's in the very beginning. The room he's in is just vintage rifles everywhere. Like, is that his room? Is that his
No,
house?
it's a gun supplier that he buys guns from in his area
Okay.
where he lives. But he's very adept at using guns. And I've gone
Yeah.
to meet law enforcement at their house and had them meet me with a gun in my face. So I've sometimes been more nervous going and trying to interview people that were in law enforcement versus, what you would call the bad guys in our series.
Yeah. Well, there doesn't seem to be like even Mario, like what you said, he didn't come across all that scary, right?
I know nothing about profiling people, and I think all of us have the ability, if the circumstances are right, to do some horrible things in life. I'm sure Mario regrets a lot of the things that he did in his past. I do believe Mario really does love animals. Of course, everyone wants to know, the million-dollar question. How did Mario get out of prison, after being sentenced to 100 years in prison? That's a really, you know, a valid question. And even the guy that put him in prison doesn't know the answer to that. So, that's a very curious thing that happened with Mario. And Mario, made a deal, obviously, with the government that he can't talk about. And I'd love to know how he got out of prison. But probably that'll, you know, go, into Mario's grave. We'll never know the answer to that. Somebody knows the answer to that.
With Mario, with Van Nostrand's, these people are characters. Every single one of them is a character. Is that a process of selecting people, or is it just people who are willing to do this just have that thing in them?
I mean, look, not everyone we wanted to interview interviewed with us. There were people that just would not interview with us. So I just have to put that out there that, we interviewed the people that were willing to talk to us in this story. And again, I'm very grateful to the Van Nostrom family and Mike Van Nostrom and his mother and his father, his late father, his brothers. We were very fortunate to get access to Mike Van Nostrom, to Tom Crutchfield, to Mario, to Braue, to many of these people that did talk to us so that we could build a story. I think Mike Van Nostrand is well known in Florida as the Lizard King. He's done prison time twice now. His father went to prison when he was younger. He was really traumatized by law enforcement, rightfully so. Mike Van Nostrand, just seeing his father go to prison when he was a teenager, so it was interesting. I asked him one time, I said, is it, humiliating that you went to prison? And he said, bro, every one of my neighbors has gone to prison. Most people in my neighborhood in Florida go to prison. So, it was interesting, his take on that.
I'm going to be respectful of your time here. Do you have any advice for filmmakers, documentary filmmakers?
Oh, God, that's a good question. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Don't fall into that, path of, oh, everyone's doing true crime. Everyone's doing films. Everyone's doing Shark Week. Everyone's doing this. Try to think and imagine something that you care about that is something special that not everybody's doing, and try to carve out a niche that is personal to you, that you care about, because making a documentary is not easy. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And if you don't care about it, you're not going to probably do a great job, is my take. And so, what I've been fortunate to do and lucky enough to be able to do is do stories in the most cases that no one even knew existed. And that was true with Tiger King. It was true with Chimp Crazy. This reptile story is a little different because there were some books written about the reptile trade. But, I try to choose stories that aren't so obvious and in the zeitgeist. And
Yeah.
so just really do what you love is my advice.
What do you hope people take away from Monsters of God? Like even the non-reptile people.
Well, I think a lot of people that don't understand reptiles vilify reptiles, or they're scared of snakes. And I think a lot of that comes from, our parenting. It comes from religion. In the book of Genesis, we say that, we have dominion over all animals, everything that flies, crawls, or swims. And somehow we've just chosen to vilify snakes because we don't understand them. We don't realize that far more snakes are non-venomous than venomous, and you'll be much more likely to die from a car accident or a gun than ever dying from a snake bite. But yet we vilify reptiles. And so I would hope the show makes people realize how special reptiles are, how beautiful they are, how we should revere them and love them and not kill them, whether they're venomous or not. And they serve a role in the ecosystem that's really important. Snakes are great rodent control. They provide a service to all of us, and let's try to keep them around for the next generations to come.
Yeah, I mean snakes, that was the one animal I couldn't bring home. Every other animal I could have, a snake was not allowed. My last question is: you have probably the coolest honor of all time. Is you have an actual tortoise named after you? How did that happen?
Oh, they made a huge mistake. No, I was very fortunate to have a tortoise named after me because I was donating and protecting land for different species of tortoises, especially in Mexico, where the tortoise resides that's named after me. And we protected a big chunk of land where that tortoise comes from. And because of that, the tortoise was named after me. The Goode's thorn scrub tortoise is what it's called, and it lives in northern western Mexico in Sonora and some of those states going up to the coast of Mexico. So yes, that was a very a real honor for me to have a tortoise named after me, especially when you realize there's only about 45 species of tortoises in the world.
That's it for me. Do you have anything you wanted to add, Eric?
No, just that I love Florida, and I spent so much time in Florida over the last 15 years, driving all over the state of Florida. And just protect your indigo snakes in Florida, and protect your Florida box turtles and diamondback rattlesnakes that live in Florida, and just take care of the beautiful reptiles that exist in Florida because it's an incredible state with amazing animals. And I would just say that, don't let your pet reptiles go that don't belong in Florida. We have enough trouble with all the invasive species in Florida already. And no, I just think Florida is an incredible place, and it's full of cool reptiles.